So, Kep1er renewed. Kind of. Despite various reassurances from their company Wake1 that they would disband in July 2024, and despite about half of their fans wishing they would disband, 7 of the 9 members of Kep1er renewed their contracts for a currently unknown amount of time, making them the first Mnet produce group to renew their contracts to any extent. Whether there is a group in the future where all members will renew their contracts remains to be seen, and I'll discuss that later in this minisode. So, yeah, Kep1er have made history, but is that a good thing? Kep1er is a produce group, if not in name, in spirit. This means that they were supposed to have a limited contract, in their case 2.5 years, for the members to become well known and cement their place in the industry so that they can go back to their original companies and be uber successful. But this begs the question, if Kep1er and its members were well known in the industry, why would their companies renew their contracts? And that's exactly the issue. As you may be able to see from other videos on my channel, Kep1er have a rocky history and have been plagued by a divided fandom, poor management, their status as an experimental group, and more over the course of their careers, which has led the group to becoming relatively obsolete for a produce group. In this minisode, I'll discuss Kep1er's decision to renew, for the most part, their contracts. I'll start by giving a brief overview of the history of the group and the details of the renewal, the turbulent series of news articles which Kep1erians had to read as disbandment date approached in May and June of 2024. I'll then discuss the implications of this renewal. What does this mean for other produce groups and especially for Zero Base 1 and the Island 2 group? I'll also consider the implications for the members of Kep1er and for Kep1er itself, both their past and their future. And I'll consider what this means for the future of Mnet survival shows and produce. In the next video, part 2 of this minisode, I'll discuss the reactions of Kep1er's various fandoms to this news. And keep in mind, I use the word fandoms lightly. OT9s, OT8s, OT1s, and so on. And then I'll make some predictions for what I think the management of a post-renewal 7-member Kep1er will look like. Basically, Kep1er were done super dirty. So with that said, let's orient ourselves in the loud world of K-pop and start off with some context. The history of Kep1er. The 9-member project group Kep1er were formed through the Mnet survival show Girls Planet 999, which was an experimental reboot season of Mnet's previously successful show Produce 101. Produce 101 had faced a rigging scandal, so after a few years, Mnet decided to test the waters with a group that they wouldn't be upset with if it failed. Hence, Kep1er was born. The original group consists of leader Yoojin, co-leader Mashiro, and members Chaehyun, Bahie, Daeyeon, Youngin, Yeso, Hikaru, and Xiaoting. The group debuted on January 3, 2022 with the mini-album First Impact and the title track Wadada. Although their debut was relatively successful, controversy around the lineup and management of the group meant that their fandom became incredibly divided, with solo fans and OT8s for almost every member. This put off prospective fans and made a lot of older fans leave the fandom, and this division and shrinking fandom, as well as some relatively objectively terrible management choices from Wake1, led to a slow and then more rapid downward spiral for the group. Their albums were charting in the 60s instead of in first and second place. Their sales were a quarter or less of what they used to be, and the group at one point didn't get a single music show win for almost 2 years, despite having had 3 comebacks. Although Kep1er were initially slated to disband in July 2024, today, in fact, the 3rd, Wake1 had announced in September 2023 that they were in discussions for renewal with the members and their respective companies, and nothing was mentioned for months afterwards, leading people to think that the group was disbanding, as literally every other produce group had. The conversations about renewal were still ongoing in January of 2024, and rumours of the group renewing were put to rest when Star News reported that the group would still be disbanding, an announcement made in late April 2024. However, Wake One clapped back at this a day later, saying that they were still in contract discussions, and this was followed in May by rumours that 7 members of the group would renew, with Yeso and Mashiro to return to their company 143 Entertainment. It had been pretty well accepted by the fans that 143 wanted Mashiro and Yeso back to add them into their group limelight, probably in hopes of increasing the group's popularity. But this rumour was then followed by even more rumours that the group would actually disband, and conflicting statements from various news sources, which were coming out almost every day. And needless to say that Kep1er's fans, and those who generally followed the group, were very confused and very tired from all of these twists and turns. And what was, in my opinion, even more amusing was seeing how Kep1er's Wikipedia page was being diligently updated after each and every announcement within hours. This confusion was finally, put to rest on May 30th, 2024, when Wake One announced that 7 members had renewed and Mashiro and Yeso would leave, as the most recent rumours had stated. This announcement made waves on the K-pop internet since it made them the first produce group to renew, and since it was generally a very unexpected situation. And Kep1er's relative downfall was well and truly confirmed when their final album as 9 and their first full album, Keep On Going On, didn't even sell 100,000 copies in the Korean circuit and didn't even reach 5,000 sales in the Japanese market. However, there was one main positive of Keep On Going On. Many of Kep1er's remaining fans liked the title track Shooting Star and the promoted single Problem, and the combined efforts of said remaining fans led to Kep1er getting another music show win after almost 2 years, a moment which was clearly emotional for the members, who could well have lost all hope. Kep1er will hold their final concert in Japan on July 15th, 2024, this being yet another indication of how much more popular they are relatively in Japan versus in Korea. And yeah, that's where Kep1er are right now, on the cusp of renewal and with tons of uncertainty. How will Wake One treat them post-renewal? Will Yeso and Mashiro be erased from the group's history? How long did they actually renew for? And more. So with that, we've oriented ourselves about what's been going on Kep1er. Let's discuss the implications of this renewal. There are many groups the renewal has implications for, both in the past and the future. Let's talk about Kep1er and the members of Kep1er themselves. First of all, and most sadly in my opinion, the renewal of Kep1er means that the group has failed. The purpose of produce groups is to create a successful group who makes Mnet and the member companies lots of money, and who makes all of the group members well known in the industry. This means that when they disband, Mnet gets tons of money and clout, and hopefully more people tuning into the next season of Produce. And the companies get lots of money and well-known members who they can then re-debut as soloists, actors, or group members, and who will hopefully bring pre-existing fans to the group and company, and fans mean money. It also means that the members themselves become more well-known, so they can themselves get offers from larger companies or could bargain for a better contract. With a direct numeric measure of their popularity, they have more weight to throw around than some random trainee. Although most produce groups were met with the produce curse, where group members weren't successful after the group, I think the best example of an exception to the produce curse is IVE. After the disbandment of IZ*ONE, Yujin and Wonyoung returned to Starship, their company, and Starship, knowing that IZ*ONE was super popular and that Wonyoung in particular was a very popular member, had a plan. Starship executed basically the perfect re-debut after a produce group. Wonyoung and Yujin had been the cute younger members of IZ*ONE, so IVE gave them a chance to change up their image, and made them two of the oldest members in the group. IVE also gave them positions of prestige which showed their positions, Wonyoung as the center and Yujin as the leader. Starship chose members who would complement Wonyoung and Yujin and their new image, and put Wonyoung and Yujin front and center, literally, taking advantage of their huge fandom from their IZ*ONE days. And the result, with a bit of good music and good management, was a super popular group who got their first daesang only about a year after debut, making them, I believe, within the top 5 groups to get the fastest daesang. The massive success of IZ*ONE and its members meant that the group had no chance of renewing, because each of the members' companies knew that they could make money off of the members themselves as part of the company. And why would you settle for a tiny little cut, probably less than a 20th of the group's profits, when you could bring your members back and make 100% of the profits? All, or at least most, of IZ*ONE's members were well known, and their companies knew that they could make more money by bringing them back to the companies. Hence, they all had a plan, and almost all of them did something with their members. So, considering everything from a financial perspective, that being the same perspective that most of these companies will consider things from, Kep1er apparently just weren't successful enough. Wake1 and the other companies involved clearly decided that the individual members hadn't made enough of an impact on the industry that they could make a group successful by themselves, or could become successful soloists. So yeah, the group failed to fulfill its literal only purpose, which is pretty depressing. Now, once upon a time, an OT8 by the name of No Bullshit said that since Bahie renewed, her company thinks she is useless. And while this is definitely a pretty big exaggeration, it is roughly theoretically true. Her company thought that she didn't have the potential to make money outside of Kep1er. But where No Bullshit goes wrong is that they don't notice that this doesn't just apply to Bahie, it applies to all of the members of the group who renewed. The only company that thought their Kep1er members were particularly useful as such was 143 with Mashiro and Yeso. Everyone else is, to quote No Bullshit, useless. And Wake1 clearly decided that Kep1er wasn't enough of a hindrance to their daily activities to get rid of, probably with the plan of continuing to use them to make money that will be used to prop up groups they like more, like Zero Base One. Also, many of the members' companies probably thought they were too old to re-debut. Kep1er are, on average, older than IZ*ONE. For a very simple comparison, their maknae Yeso is turning 19 this year, and Wonyoung was only turning 17 when IZ*ONE disbanded in 2021. As many people have pointed out, it's very possible that Yujin runs away from Cube as soon as Kep1er disband, and that she probably wouldn't be able to re-debut at her age. So, as sad as it is, both she and Cube have probably decided it's better off that she stays in Kep1er. So yeah, the renewal of the 7 members means that those companies didn't think their members were particularly useful financially, and that they, 1, probably didn't have a plan for those members after Kep1er, and that 2, Kep1er wasn't successful enough and didn't make enough of an impact on the industry to make their members well known and to secure their careers. Again, pretty depressing. This means that they aren't just the first produce group to renew, so much as they are the first produce group to fail, a far more upsetting record to hold, and one that many fans don't seem to understand. It seems to be a myth that the more popular a produce group gets, the more likely they are to renew, hence why some people were so convinced that IZ*ONE would renew. But the fact of the matter is, the more successful a produce group gets, the less likely they are to renew, since the members are probably more known and will encourage the companies to have a better plan to use them to make more money afterwards. So the people wishing for Zero Base One to renew, please don't. I really hope that Zero Base One disband, because I really hope they are successful enough to be an actual success, and thus to not renew. Speaking of Zero Base 1, what are the implications for them? If Kep1er renewed, does that make Zero Base 1 more likely to also renew as a result? Well, I mean, kind of. Kep1er have kind of changed the precedent for produce groups with their renewal, and this could well kickstart more serious Zero Base 1 renewal discussions, and it could change how Wake 1 manage the group. But I don't think it would directly lead to a potential renewal. Just because Kep1er renewed doesn't mean the rules have changed. Zero Base 1 still has a 2.5-year contract, and they still have many companies who will need to be contacted for renewal talks, which means more people to please and more companies who are more likely to have a plan for their famous trainees. I think Zero Base 1 will be like any other produce group. If they are successful, and I hope they are, they won't renew. I think it's also important to note that Zero Base 1 seem to have more well-known individual members than Kep1er. Kep1er are kind of a homogenous group to a lot of people. The only members non-fans tend to know seem to be Bahie or Yujin, and maybe Xiaoting or Chaehyun if they're lucky. But Zero Base 1 have several well-known individual trainees. Hanbin, Zhanghao, Ricky, Tele, and Jiwoong are all decently well-known in general K-pop spaces, and the other members aren't far behind in popularity. Zero Base 1 so far have had both greater group and individual member popularity than Kep1er, and I think if they carry on the way they're going, they're unlikely to renew. This could lead to an interesting situation where Kep1er may outlive Zero Base 1. This would make them the first produce girl group to naturally outlive their brother group. Although coincidentally, they would be the second total group to do so, as IZ*ONE also outlived X1, but not naturally. I love produce stats. This also means that a future Girls Planet season could feature Kep1er as guests, not Zero Base 1, making them the first produce girl group to feature on a female survival show season, since usually we alternate genders. Now, another group this could impact, the Island 2 group. This group is the first permanent girl group under Wake 1, and many people have voiced concerns about how Wake 1 could manage 2 girl groups, and 2 permanent girl groups at that, at once, when they could barely even manage Kep1er by themselves even before Zero Base 1 debuted. They've also wondered whether Kep1er will push out the Island 2 group, or vice versa, and this is a very valid concern. Wake 1 have shown themselves to not be the best at management, to say the least, and although we haven't seen what they do with more than 2 major groups at once, I think it's fair to say that their resources might be spread a bit thin, and this will probably lead to whichever of the girl groups is less popular being pushed away. Which group that is just depends on whether Mnet and Wake 1 think that Island 2 was super unpopular and lacked viewers, or whether they think that Kep1er have fallen too far and aren't worth the effort. I mean, Kep1er sells concerts in Japan, but 84,000 sales on a full album that was also supposed to be their amazing disbandment album is really sad for a produce group, even considering the increase in price of living around the world and their loss of fans and bad management. Now finally, one thing that I haven't seen a lot of people considering out of this, the implications this has for the future of Mnet's produce series and Planet 999. Girls Planet had one main goal, to reintroduce produce to the world and to test the waters after the rigging scandal. And did it succeed? Kind of? It succeeded in that Mnet were well received enough that they felt comfortable to start making more produce shows, Boys Planet, and later picking up Island 2, which got some Planet 999 twists. But at the same time, it didn't succeed. As experimental as it was, it still ought to have created a popular group, and Kep1er's renewal means that this is the first produce season to fail. This could be causing Mnet a lot of stress. Produce is no longer guaranteed to make a popular enough group, and make enough money. They may believe that it's no longer worth the effort. However, Zero Base 1 and Boys Planet so far have been successful and well received, so if I were Mnet I would probably take the message from this that boy groups will probably still be well received, but not so much girl groups. Hence we could well see something a bit like what we're seeing right now, smaller scale shows like Island 2 for girl groups and larger scale shows like Boys Planet to create boy groups. At the same time, it's a bit odd because one of the reasons Kep1er was so controversial was because of the particular nature of Girls Planet and the contestants on the show. We haven't had much of an equivalent of Bahia or Dion since, and they're two of the most contentious members in Kep1er. But on the other hand, the editing of Island 2 and the blatant favoritism it's shown to certain contestants has turned a lot of people off that show. So I feel that the female seasons of Mnet survival shows just aren't being well received right now in general. Smaller shows like Island 2 need less budget. There's less people to feed and clothe, a smaller environment and set to create, and their final group has less members, which means less of everything. These shows would be, if managed in a stingy way, which I'm sure Mnet would do, cheaper. But boy groups may well continue to warrant massive spectacles like Boys Planet. I don't know the future, of course, but this is one likely prediction. My alternate prediction is that we don't see any more Produce or Planet 999. We'll either only have island scale shows or nothing. Planet 999, or at least the female season, hasn't been as successful as Mnet likely hoped, and the failure of Kep1er, as well as the diversification of the survival show niche and K-pop market in general, would discourage Mnet from making further Planet 999 seasons, and I think that this is shown through their choice to host Island 2 in place of a third season of Planet 999. Since the downfall of Produce, lots of other companies have got in on the survival show market, and now we have so many survival shows that we have multiple Produce-style shows airing at once, sometimes 3 or more at a time. Off the top of my head, literally only just off the top of my head, we've had Island 1, Universe Ticket, Are You Next, A2K, The Howling, Fantasy Boys, My Teenage Girl, and the following male season. And like I said, that's just off the top of my head. It's also not even including the show that made Vicha or Baby Monster, or that male survival show that had the North Korean trainee. It's also not including Chinese and Japanese survival shows, which seem to have exploded in popularity, and which many people seem to have migrated to instead of the Korean survival shows, which they think are more trashy, treat their trainees worse, have more favoritism, and are lower quality in general. It's looking really bad for Produce in Korea, let's just say that. Mnet's non-Produce / Planet 999 survival shows also seem to be doing worse. Queendom 2 was pretty disliked and controversial, and I barely heard a single word about Build Up and Queendom Puzzle, and didn't even know they'd aired until after they ended. This is insane when compared to the huge impact that Queendom 1, Road to Kingdom, and Kingdom seemed to have. So yeah, Kep1er may well be both the first and the last Produce group to renew. Zero Base 1 really ought to be successful enough to disband, and I don't foresee any future Planet 999 seasons in the next few years at least. So with the knowledge that this may well mark the end of Produce, what led to its downfall? First, the departure from the original concept, which, to be fair, was done to rebrand after the scandal, but which also alienated fans, seen by how many people still cling to Produce systems like the letter grades. Mnet also likely alienated Korean fans by catering more to an international audience and including international trainees, while also allowing international fans to vote. They also, in turn, alienated international fans by rigging the system against them and against international trainees. So basically they've alienated almost all of their long-term fans. This means that all that's left is quite a small community of newer fans, many of whom tend to be extremely young and thus lack almost any media literacy skills. These younger fans may also not have the same buying power as older fans, a possible factor leading to the lower sales of Kep1er. All the older fans are used to Mnet's BS and won't humour them with purchases anymore. The rigging scandal was also obviously huge. It destroyed the reputation of the show and all of the momentum it had been gaining since 2015. Produce was something which I think really depended on momentum. The show would run, the group would come out shortly after, and said group would have lots and lots and lots of promotions to keep the hype up, until they disbanded, by which time another season would have run and an opposite-sex group would already have taken their place, shortly followed by the same-sex following group, For example, Produce X101 aired less than a year after the disbandment of 101, so 101 fans could easily migrate. But this momentum was completely destroyed when the rigging scandal broke, and the disbandment of X1 broke the pattern, leaving Kep1er essentially stranded with the weight of a dynasty on their shoulders. Something they definitely couldn't live up to with the controversy of Girls Planet and with their bad management, or possibly even if both of those things hadn't existed. Speaking of, the controversies of Girls Planet and Kep1er have probably made Mnet more hesitant to continue Planet 999, since they saw how fandom division directly led to the fall of Kep1er. They don't hate controversy in and of itself, more so what it means for their bottom line. Also, K-pop fans are more aware than ever how idols can be mistreated, which means it's getting harder and harder for Mnet to hide how these shows break various human rights and to justify that. And the more they run these shows, the more likely it is that they have another huge controversy or get in more trouble with the law, something they definitely want to avoid. So Mnet themselves have lots of reasons to not want to do any more Produce seasons. I also previously mentioned how the current K-pop industry and survival show niches are very oversaturated, meaning it's hard for Planet 999 and Produce groups to stand out. IZ*ONE only just managed to catch the very beginning of this, so avoided most of the consequences, but Kep1er were caught in the middle of it. Zero Base One coincidentally debuted in a time of many girl groups, which made them unique, but that definitely wasn't planned, and no future Planet 999 group would be guaranteed this free run. And there are the fans that I already mentioned too. They're either too old to give a shit and dollar about Mnet, or too young to have media literacy skills, which then turns off other fans, as younger fans blab more about random things or get into fan wars. This isn't an inherent fault of younger fans, more so of the shows themselves and their target demographics. They want people with no media literacy skills because these people are more likely to fall for their editing hijinks. But those people will also bring in less money as a downside and do have the tendency to turn off older fans who have the actual money. I mean, we really ought to have seen audition announcements for another season of Planet 999 or for Island at this point, but we haven't, leading me to believe either they're quite far off in the future or even not happening. So that was a discussion of just some of the many reasons leading to the likely downfall of Produce, a history-making series which, if it dies here, didn't even make it to its 10th birthday, despite spanning 3 generations of K-pop. These are some pretty big implications, and we'll discuss the fandom responses to these announcements, as well as some of my predictions for Kep1er's future in the next episode. For now, let's wrap this one up. In this minisode, I've introduced the concept of Kep1er's renewal and have discussed the history leading up to it. I then discussed the many implications that this renewal has for the members and group, the industry, and the future of Produce survival shows. Let's give a quick run-through of these implications. The renewal implies that Kep1er failed as a group, and that the members aren't well known enough or well positioned enough in the industry to make more money in their companies. It also means that the management of Zero Base One could change, although it will probably leave them unscathed for the most part, as they will be likely successful enough to disband. It will likely lead to a situation where either Kep1er or the Island 2 group are left in the dungeon, as Wake One focuses on whichever permanent girl group they think would be more financially successful. It also could well signal the end of Produce and Planet 999, where Mnet may either not make another season of these shows or may stick to smaller scale shows like Island 2, which have larger rewards for smaller costs. As you can see, some of these are pretty big, like the death of Produce, the disbandment or renewal of Zero Base One. That's pretty huge for just one renewal. And that's exactly why this renewal made such a splash in the industry, and why I wanted to discuss it so much. To look at exactly how big of a splash it made in Kep1er's fandom and related fandoms, I'm sorry to say you'll have to tune into the next minisode where I will look at fandom reactions to the renewal, and will make a few predictions about how Kep1er will be treated in their future as a 7-member group. That minisode will be uploaded just after this one, so if you're watching this, it will already be up. So why waste time? Just jump into the next video on the playlist if you think fandom reactions would be interesting. But that's the end of today's minisode. Thanks for watching, I hope you learned something, and I'll see you in the next one.